from Interfaith Alliance, this is State of Belief Radio. I'm your host, Reverend Welton Gaddy.
As a pastor, my support for Question 6 is rooted in my belief that the government should treat everyone equally. I would not want someone denying my rights based upon their religious views. Therefore, I should not deny others based upon mine. It's about fairness.
A popular but simplistic political construct is that of so-called red states and blue states. It may be useful shorthand for TV talking heads, but it doesn't tell us much about the diverse people populating those states. The same could be said for supposedly traditional social issue constituencies in this country. Too often, the perception is that matters like marriage equality face strongest opposition from people of faith, and particularly from traditionally African American churches. So, are there red churches and blue churches? Goodness, I hope not. Here to offer some insight into that question and share some of the incredible work he's been doing for many years in the area of social justice is the Reverend Delmon Coates, who serves as senior pastor at Mount Enon Baptist Church in Clinton, Maryland. Pastor Coates, thank you for joining us on State of Belief.
Thank you for having me on.
I'm always frustrated by the stereotypes that persist that say, if you're a person of faith, you probably are going to be a social conservative, and especially in terms of the African American church, you hear that all the time. You lead a congregation of 8,000 people in Maryland. You're a leading voice for social justice. You spoke out in favor of marriage equality in your state. First of all, thankfully, you break the stereotype. Secondly, has that always been a part of your ministry?
Well, let me answer the second question first. First, thank you for having me on. It is a fundamental part of my ministry. I believe that social justice and the fight for freedom, justice, and equality is a fundamental part of what it means to be a church. My understanding of the teachings of Scripture are not just that God is interested in personal piety, but also interested in helping to make the world become a beloved community. And so it is important to me that we marry the prophetic tradition of social justice with a fundamental understanding of our faith. So for me, it's a core to my preaching ministry, and it's always been a fundamental part of my preaching ministry, and it's also a fundamental part of my understanding of the Black church. So I pastor a predominantly African American congregation, and the Black church tradition historically has referred to that tradition of African American religion that has been on the side of social justice and the fight for freedom.
It's kind of difficult if you really do care for people to divide them up and say, well, I really love your soul, but I don't care much about how your life's going.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about the very familiar story in the Scripture of the story of the so-called Good Samaritan, and we focus on the way in which the Samaritan cares for the individual who's been robbed and beaten. Those of us who are interested in social justice are interested in the conditions on that Jericho road that day. Why was there not better lighting on that road? Why weren't there more police on that road? And so we're interested in not just charity, but we're also interested in the systemic infrastructure that create the conditions in which people live. When I came out for marriage equality most recently, many colleagues thought I had committed professional suicide for the exact reason that you mentioned. Many people assume that people of faith, and African Americans in particular, are fundamentally, inherently opposed to gay rights. Last year, 2012, was the best year in the history of our church. We had over 1,000 people join our church last year. And I think it's because they understand that while people of faith have a right to be in the public square, we do not have a right to subject the public square to our own personal ideological, theological, and religious beliefs. They understood what this issue is about, and I think that it will continue to take place as the issue spreads around the country.
Well said. I want to parse that a little bit in just a moment, but first of all, I want to take one step back. Where in your life, where does that mandate for social justice come from?
Yes. Well, I'm going to go back to these stories I often heard from my parents, in particular my father growing up as a child. My father grew up as a sharecropper in North Carolina. And as a kid growing up, I often heard about the, stories of the challenges that my father and his family, my grandparents faced coming up in North Carolina as a sharecropper, picking cotton and tobacco. And so it's been the whole quest for equality has been a part of my family life. I think it's also been a part of my church life, coming of age in a church in the inner city in Richmond, Virginia, where I'm from, surrounded by housing projects, attempting to understand the relationship between what we did inside of the church and the social reality outside of the church. I really wrestled with that. There were housing projects around my church. The juvenile detention center was maybe 50 feet from the front door of our church. The city jail about 200 feet. And so every day that I went to church, I saw these images of economic poverty, of criminal justice issues, and I always wrestled to understand the intersection, the nexus between our faith and the lived reality outside of the church. And so I went to college at Morehouse College and was really taught the social gospel, and so that's really where it comes from for me.
Well, what's interesting to me is that that passion for prophetic social justice is within you, but I know a lot of people who get somewhat close to that passion for social justice, but then step back from the public arena, one, if social justice is controversial, and of course it's always going to be controversial, but a part of your motivation, if I've understood what I've heard you say in the past, is that it is also a matter of religious liberty, of constitutional values that mandate equality as well. And some people, I think, step back from the constitutional issue and hide behind a kind of religion that doesn't want to recognize that.
Sure. No, it's a very good question. It is a fundamental part of my theological heritage. I'm a Baptist, came up American Baptist, wherein the separation of church and state is a fundamental part of my faith tradition. So one of the things that I value as an American, as a Christian in America, is that I have religious freedom. But I don't have the right to impose my religious views or beliefs on others in the public square. In order for me to affirm my own religious liberty, I have to accord others that same freedom. And so I think it's what makes our country so great, that we have a democracy. I'm concerned, Reverend Gaddy, about some of the language that we hear from perhaps well-intentioned people of faith. You kind of hear this theocratic language. No, I value that we live in a free, pluralistic democracy. And I think that what makes our country great is that we ought to be able to have a nation where we can fight for the rights of every person, regardless of their race, religion, country of origin, gender, and sexual orientation.
Have you, and I should tell you, just so you'll know, I'm Baptist also. And I know that historic Baptist tradition.
Yes.
I still find people who struggle with, if this is what I think Scripture says, and this is what I think the Constitution says, and I don't think they're in sync with each other, what should I do? Has that been at all a struggle for you?
It has not been a struggle for me personally, but it has been a struggle for many people in the pews. And what I share with people is that our challenge as people of faith is to live in our faith, not to legislate it. I mean, gosh, I know clergy and pastors who don't believe in a range of things, but I wouldn't want to be denied equal treatment under the law because someone doesn't believe in divorce or my goodness, premarital sex or a range of other things. And so, yes, you have the right to live in your faith, but we don't want to legislate that. I think that sets a very dangerous precedent in American public life. We have seen on an international scale how that kind of religious fundamentalism, what that can lead to, and I don't think we want that in America.
We got plenty of bad examples.
Yes, absolutely. I've heard rhetoric in which people would attempt to use their personal theology on foreign affairs, and Reverend Gaddy, if our nation goes to war, I want it to be based upon sound intelligence, a credible threat. And not because of someone's reading of, a biblical text from 2,500 years ago. These are very serious matters that we're facing today as our nation becomes more diverse, as our world becomes more global. We have to figure out how to live in a global community where diversity is a value that we celebrate. I think that as we become more diverse as a nation, that the values that ought to inform our public policy conversations ought to be the values that we share in common as Americans. Values of freedom, of equal treatment under the law and liberty, not those things that distinguish us.
What about the people who say, and it fits right in with the other question I asked you too, people who say you cannot make a comparison between the civil rights movement and the movement for rights in the GLBT community. How do you respond?
Well, what I share with people is that the civil rights movement, as advanced most popularly by Martin Luther King Jr., was derived from Mohandas K. Gandhi, right? So African Americans do not have a monopoly on civil rights. Many of the tactics that Dr. King employed were derived from the situation in India. And so for me, the denial of civil and human rights can happen for any group of people, because of their color, their religion, sexual orientation. To me, gay rights is a civil rights issue. For me, it is a civil rights issue. Yes.
There are plenty of other issues that have to do with social justice, and you find them to some extent in the scriptures. You also find them in the pages of the Washington Post. Immigration, gun control, health care, federal budget. How engaged are you in those other areas, and what's your message about what people of faith should do in relation to policy?
I'm very much involved in a range of public policy issues beyond LGBT rights. One of the primary issues that I'm personally engaged in is the whole issue of criminal justice reform, which has impacted many people, poor Black and brown people in this country. Criminal justice reform, we've been attempting to work with folks impacted by the real estate collapse in this country. We have got to, we need financial reform. We need Glass-Steagall. We need a range, but as a pastor, I've been dealing with the range of people who have been impacted by foreclosure circumstance. Our congregation has been active in media advocacy, healthcare reform, and public education. I mean, just about any issue that people, deal with on a regular basis. I believe that it's my call and challenge as a clergy leader to address these issues.
Yeah.
Yes.
Will you talk with your people from the pulpit or in other ways about immigration reform and the federal budget?
From the pulpit, there are times when I have certainly addressed the issue of the budget from the pulpit. Mm-hmm. I think there are other forums in which we can address those issues. We have town hall meetings. We have email blasts that we email to our membership. and so I may or may not always get engaged in this. I am in the process of developing relationships with Hispanic evangelical leaders on the issue of immigration reform, because it's interesting you bring this up. When I came out in support for marriage equality, many individuals said, why are you supporting their issue? And my response was always, marriage equality is not their issue. It's not the issue for the LGBT community. This is our issue, because the denial of rights for some sets the precedent for the denial of rights for others. The immigration question is not just the province or an issue for Hispanics or others attempting to immigrate to this country from other parts of the world. It's an issue for all of us. And so we have got to figure out how to get out of our ideological silos and to realize that if it affects one of us, it affects all of us. And we're called and compelled to make sure that the principles of our Constitution and the guarantees of our Constitution are applied to every American.
Pastor Coates, I don't think you've said anything I don't agree with. In fact, you've said it so exceedingly well. It's one other question I want to ask you, that because I know that this kind of ministry, the things that we deal with, are at the center of controversy often, and that we often take a good hit of criticism, both from our friends and from people who disagree with us. Where do you find hope in that?
Wow, it's a very good question. Well, I think my hope is in my understanding of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Certainly, in the theological tradition that comes to us from the Gospels, there is crucifixion, but there's vindication on the other side, right? And that's the good news. That's fundamentally the good news of my faith tradition. And so while there might be short-term and temporary attacks, that on the other side there's vindication for that. And that vindication may come in this life, or it may come at another time in another life, right? So that's my hope. Yeah. And that's where I find hope, yes.
Reverend Delmon Coates is senior pastor at Mount Enon Baptist Church in Clinton, Maryland. With a congregation of 8,000, he's a leading voice for social justice and an unapologetic advocate for some positions that are seen as unpopular in traditionally African-American faith communities. Reverend Coates, I don't know. I'm going to have a long conversation with our producer. I have the feeling that we need to run your interview every program we do for the next 5 or 6 months. Oh, wow. Because you have been so articulate about what the meaning of our faith tradition is. Yes. And I'm so grateful for you doing that. I know that you've got a busy schedule. It was a long drive into the studio. I really thank you for taking your valuable time for being with us on State of Belief Radio.
I'm honored. Thanks for having me.